October 5th, 2023 meeting. I'm Dia Palchik, Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I'd like to note that we are starting the meeting at 7:20 p.m. Our apologies. We are live streaming the meeting on MVTC's YouTube channel. Our board administrator has already confirmed we have an in-person quorum. I'd like to welcome, is he here? Yeah. Oh, there he is. I'd like to welcome Falls Church City Council member Philip Duncan, who is here serving as Mr. Snyder's alternate. So good to see you, Mr. Duncan. Thank you for coming tonight. Excellent. We do have two commissioners who have requested to participate electronically. Are they? I do see them, I believe. Jen DeBrule is participating virtually from Florida, where she is attending a conference. And Nick Clemente is participating virtually from out of state as he is on travel. Could I have a motion to approve Commissioners Clemente and DeBrule's request to participate remotely?
So moved.
Second.
All right, I think motion, Mr. Alcorn, second from Takis. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, excellent. The motion passes. We have a very full agenda tonight. That's why you have candy in front of you. We're going to try to get through it. I trust you all have reviewed the agenda. I will be a little tough tonight on all of us, including the presenters, so that we get home at a reasonable hour this evening. Mr. Smedberg will need to leave early tonight and requested we move the WMATA agenda meeting item up in the agenda. If there are no objections, we will move the WMATA discussion to after the DRPT presentation. Before we move into the agenda items, Kate, do we receive any public comments this month?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have one public comment from the Coalition for Smarter Growth. They're sharing concerns about the VDOT process and approach to the 495 Southside Express Lane study. Their comment is that includes that VDOT had not appropriately looked at alternatives to highway expansion. And also voiced some concerns about moving ahead in their study in advance of the completion of WMATA's Blue, Orange, and Silver Line study. And also articulated concerns of DRPT in its study, which we'll hear a little bit about later, which has already concluded, failed to look at how transit-oriented land use and housing plans in the area could have addressed the traffic issues in the corridor. That was sent out to all commissioners, the full contents of that a little bit earlier today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you to Coalition for Smarter Growth. We are now on to action item item 2. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes of the September 7th, 2023 commission meeting?
So moved.
So moved by Takis, second. Seconded by Mrs. Bronte. Any further discussion? I don't think everyone was there. Hearing none, I will start with a roll call vote first for those participating virtually. Mr. Clemente. Nick, can you hear me? I don't hear him yet. And Mr. Brule is not voting yet. So I will now ask for the rest of the commission here in the room. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I see Mr. Aguirre, Mr. McKay, and Mr. Skiles.
I think I just,
And Mr. Letourneau. Were you here, Paul?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, and Mr. Duncan.
Okay. I'll remember.
You got that around there? All right, and it's supposed to be Nick. So excellent. I believe the motion still passes. All right, wonderful. Tonight we have two actions on the consent agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
So moved, a second. Okay, Mr. Aguirre. Any further discussion? Hearing done, we'll all do the roll call vote. First, for those participating virtually, let me see if Mr. Clemente can hear me now. I do not hear him. All those in the room, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful, the motion passes. Tonight, we have presentations from the Virginia Department of Transportation and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation on their respective studies related to the southern portion of the I-495 corridor. VDOT's 495 Southside Express Lane study identifies preliminary alternative concepts for 11 miles of I-495 between the Springfield interchange in Fairfax County and the Maryland Highway 210 interchange in PG County, Maryland. The RPT study is a separate effort that looked at transit and other strategies that could benefit the corridor. I'd like to welcome Michelle Shropshire, thank you, Acting Director, Northern Virginia Mega Projects, and Michelle Holland, the Communications Manager for the Northern Virginia Mega Projects, who will give the VDOT presentation. DRPT Director Jen DeBrule will follow with a presentation on DRPT studies. We will hold questions until after both presentations. Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Shropshire. As mentioned, I'm the Acting Mega Projects Director for Nova District. As most of you are aware, Susan Shaw will be retiring shortly, so I'm on loan from Fredericksburg District. All right, so we can skip to the next slide, please. As most of you are aware, we have a very robust express lanes network in the Northern Virginia region. There's over 94 miles currently in service. We have 2 projects that are under construction right now, and we have 2 ongoing studies, the Southside study we're talking about tonight, and the 95 bidirectional study. Next slide, please. The study that we're currently conducting is an environmental study to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act. We are evaluating transportation improvements that would extend and provide continuity of an express lane system on the southern section of the Capital Beltway. The study is being conducted in conjunction with multiple state, federal partners, regional and local partners that are listed on the slide in front of you. Next slide, please. The specific area that we're studying includes an 11-mile section of I-495. On the western end, it begins just east of the Springfield interchange in Fairfax County, and it ends on the eastern end at Maryland 210 in Prince George's County, Maryland. And this study area covers the last segment on I-495 in Virginia where express lanes have not been implemented. Next slide, please. For those of you who frequently travel through this corridor, this slide is really no surprise. It is a snapshot of typical weekday afternoon travel with the heaviest volume, as you can see there between US Route 1 and the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. This represents congestion that we see in afternoons between typically 3 and 7 p.m. Congestion goes in the opposite direction most mornings, and travel time reliability is often impacted by accidents along the same corridor. Next slide, please. This slide kind of outlines our study process and our schedule. The star at the top kind of illustrates where we are in our study process. The current study started in 2022 with development of our purpose and needs statement, some initial data collection, and some initial public outreach that was held last May in 2022. Right now, we have developed some preliminary alternative concepts, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Continuing on with our study, we'll refine those preliminary alternative concepts into a narrowed down range. We'll start doing some more detailed environmental analysis. We'll present those to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And then the final stage of our study will include a public hearing on the environmental assessment, on the recommended preferred alternative, and then we'll conclude with the NEPA decision by the Federal Highway Administration. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates our purpose and needs statement for our environmental study. The purpose, as we've talked about a few times here, is to evaluate transportation improvements that would extend and provide continuity of an express lane system on the Capital Beltway between the Springfield interchange and Maryland 210. The needs for the study can be kind of summed up in a few of these key words that are illustrated on the slide. Provide express lane system continuity, provide additional travel choices, reduce congestion and improve travel reliability, improve safety, and provide consistency with local and regional plans. Next slide, please. The 10 preliminary alternative concepts have been developed for this phase of our study. This slide illustrates all 10 of those. First is our no-build alternative, which is the existing condition. Then we have a TSM, a TDM alternative, which focuses on such solutions such as ramp metering, extension of acceleration and deceleration lanes. We have a part-time shoulder use alternative, which would use the existing shoulders that are there today as for travel during peak travel periods. We have a standalone transit alternative, which would focus on a bus-only lane. We have a transit TSM TDM alternative, which focuses on new bus routes and park and ride facilities along the corridor. We have two alternatives that have looked at addition of general purpose lanes, either adding one general purpose lane or two general purpose lanes in each direction along the corridor. And then 3 express lanes alternatives in our range of preliminary concepts. And that would either be a 1 express lane in each direction, 2 express lanes in each direction, or a 2 express lane reversible system. Next slide, please. As part of our preliminary concept alternative analysis, the team has used some key criteria to evaluate these in keeping with our purpose and need. And that criteria was system continuity, travel choice, reduction of congestion and improving that travel time reliability, safety, and then consistency or compatibility with regional plans. Next slide, please. Pedestrian accommodations and bicycle accommodations will be considered with any combination of the alternatives that are moved forward for further consideration and detailed study. We're working with the key stakeholders that are listed on this slide to identify any gaps in the existing network. And as the study corridor is constrained, has limited right-of-way, efforts will be made to limit impacts and make use of these existing facilities. Examples would be conversion of sidewalks to shared use paths or connecting areas that may have gaps presently. Next slide, please. A few key considerations regarding the Woodrow Wilson Bridge in our study. All of the commitments have been satisfied from the Federal Highway Administration's record of decision from 2000. And there was space preserved on the bridge when it was built for future HOV, express bus, or transit. For our current study, a couple key considerations to keep in mind. We are not considering physically widening that structure. And also it's not feasible to relocate the concrete barrier that separates the through and local lanes due to some limitations with that drawbridge span. Next slide, please. This is a graphical illustration of what we're talking about, that preservation of space on the structure for future transit. The top half of the graphic depicts a 2 express lanes preliminary concept, and the bottom half of the drawing depicts how that 2 express lanes concept could in the future be converted to a transit or a rail option on the bridge, still keep one of those express lanes. There's not enough space to fit 2 express lanes and rail on the bridge at the same time, but there is space that exists out there on that structure today. All right, next slide, please. This highlights the next steps in our study process. I'll go through just a few of the very key milestones, which include briefings to the Commonwealth Transportation Board planned for later this year and next spring. As I mentioned earlier, we'll hold public hearings for the environmental assessment and the recommended preferred alternative, and that's anticipated for next summer in 2024. And we're targeting a decision from the Federal Highway Administration for the NEPA work in late 2024. Next slide. This slide highlights just the number of ways that we are accepting public input on our study. That's email, traditional mail, or by phone. Comment and feedback is always welcome. We have extended our deadline for comment to be part of the public record from our recent public information meetings until next Tuesday, October 10th. And to keep up with what's happening on the study, you can visit the website or sign up for our e-newsletter. And then next slide, which is our last one, is just the contact information for our mega projects team. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I know we have questions. We do have Jen DeBrule. If people are okay waiting a little bit because of time, we'll have Jen do her presentation and then take questions for everyone. Jen, go ahead. Yep.
Okay, I'm waiting for my slides to come up, but I'll go ahead and get started. We initiated a study in parallel with VDOT study, very similar to what we did on the northern extension of the express lanes on 495, and very similar to the study work that we did back in 2018, 2019 on I-66. We can go to the next slide, please. So we've done our study separate. It is input into VDOT's NEPA study, so it was very important that we get out a little bit ahead of them, get our study completed so that we could provide that input to their work. We've used the same study area as the VDOT Southside Express Lane study. We did 2 rounds of public outreach in 2022 in the summer and then towards the end of the year in December. We've done that through public meetings, we've done public surveys, we've had a number of pop-up events, and we've also participated in all of the VDOT public meetings. We also held 4 stakeholder group meetings through the course of the study, and we heard some really common themes from the public during all of our engagement. It's been very consistent. There's interest in more transportation options. We've heard how important it is that travel time be reliable in the corridor and that there be more connections to multimodal facilities, which there are a lot of in the study corridor. There is interest in both bus and rail, as well as improved bike and pedestrian connections, interest in enhancements to both existing transit service, as well as providing new transit service, and really a lot of discussion around frequent service so that transit is a more attractive option. So we can go on to the next slide. So we had a broad range of stakeholders involved in the study, as you'll see from both Virginia and from Maryland, and then from our regional agencies and our transit providers. You can go to the next slide. In terms of our baseline conditions, there is pretty limited service along I-495 in the study area or over the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. There is some parallel and Metro Rail feeder bus service in Alexandria and Fairfax County. There's bus service in the Prince George's County side in Maryland, in the vicinity of National Harbor. But we also have, pretty numerous rail options in the corridor with the Virginia Railway Express, Metro Rail, our Amtrak service all parallels this corridor in Virginia. And then we have a myriad of commuter assistance programs that exist through the corridor as well. Next slide. So when we were looking at the study, and again, those that have followed our other transit and TDM studies, this is a pretty similar approach that we've used in other corridors. We've looked at new or enhanced transit services, really looking at those from a couple of different perspectives. What is the propensity for transit in the corridor, and then what benefit would we gain from additional reliability if expanded express lanes were provided in this I-495 corridor across the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. We also always look at our commuter assistance programs and look at alternatives, to the single occupant vehicle and how we can really get folks out of those single occupant vehicles into transit options and into shared ride situations. And then we also look at technology, like what kind of technology can we provide to encourage the use of transit and alternative transportation modes and provide a more modern, easy to use travel decision-making process. And so again, those are things that we have looked at in our other corridor studies and are very similar to what we have seen in this corridor as well. Next slide. So what do we have in our study for transit recommendations? I think it's important, it's not on the slide, but I think it's important to state that this study was started after the WMATA Blue Orange Silver study that's looking at a much broader study area and much farther reaching Metro Rail expansion options than what we're able to look at in this particular footprint. So our study has primarily focused on potential transit, whether it's express bus, commuter bus, local bus. It's really been much more bus focused. We did look at and test a rail alternative, and that rail alternative would be something that would just be located within the study corridor. So we're talking about a connection between basically Huntington over to National Harbor, and making just that rail connection across the bridge and into the existing Metro Rail network. Just looking at that small piece with the information that we have as part of this study, it was not really seen as cost effective compared to the bus options, but that is, again, looking at a very small subsection. I'm really focused on what comes out of the Blue, Orange, Silver study that WMATA is doing. We don't want to step on that process or preclude anything that might come out of that process, but we did want to look at just this small piece of rail. We also looked at transit options that would operate in different timeframes. We looked at options that could operate throughout the day and also those that would be focused on the peak hour. One more thing before I leave this slide. I'm sorry, I'm just making sure that I don't forget anything. I want to reinforce what Michelle shared about the express lanes. I think there's been a lot of confusion, and I want to make sure that we're really clear that nothing that is being considered in VDOT's study, and this is some of the input that we've had, nothing precludes the future transit use of that space. And I think the graphic that VDOT has in their presentation demonstrates that well. That there are options where we can coexist in the space in the near term and in the long term. And I think that's where our study and VDOT study really do fit very well together. Next slide, please. All right, so again, much like we have done in our other studies, we've looked at different levels of investment and different packages with different timeframes associated with them. The near-term package for this corridor is a package of improvements from a transit perspective that could be implemented prior to 2030. So that is, assuming that if there were express lanes, that would be a first year of operation, and that includes one new express bus route providing service between Alexandria and Tysons, with connections in between at Huntington, Van Dorn, and some other locations in the Tysons area. The other proposed route would extend the length of the study corridor from Maryland on to Tysons, with connections into the Metro Rail system at Branch Avenue, in the Eisenhower area of Alexandria, and then again, numerous locations in Tysons. The midterm package, again, these are candidate projects dependent upon future funding, but are looking at that range of time between 2030 and 2045. That would be the near-term packages, and then we would layer in some additional services, additional bus trip or additional trips added to Metrobus NH1 and NH2 routes, and then 5 different new bus lines connecting different activity points in Maryland, primarily Clinton area, Northern Charles County, a couple of routes from Northern Charles County to Alexandria, the Pentagon, and Roslyn, and then into the district, and then some new connections in Virginia between Huntington, Van Dorn, and Dunn-Loring, Merrifield area. And again, trying to make more connections both across the bridge and then also up and on the Maryland side, and then some specific to the Virginia side. The long-term package looks way beyond that, beyond 2045. This includes a number of additional alternatives. You can see the lines on the screen. We're really, in this slate of recommendations, looking at beefing up transit service, not only across the bridge, but again, serving that southern leg of the Beltway in Virginia, and also making more connections on the Maryland side as well. Next slide. So as we've indicated a couple of times, our study is complete. It was completed earlier this year. It's available on our website and was provided to VDOT, and we're working closely with them as they work to conclude their study. And I think that's going to be my last slide, and I will turn it back over to the chair.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Brew. I know we have quite a few questions and comments, both for you and for VDOT. So I did see Senator Eben had his hand first.
Yeah, I had a question specifically about slide 11 of the first presentation, where it talks about long-term preservation of the transit option. And I wanted to know, if there's been any consideration to making sure that the dedicated lanes for rail would just be kept there the way it's on the bottom of the presentations. Is that, and maybe you could explain it further, is that showing one or two dedicated automobile or bus lanes for passage across the bridge?
The graphic that we have depicting right now, at the top of the graphic, we used to show a 2 express lane option at the top. And at the bottom of the graphic, we used that to illustrate how that could be converted in the future to a 1 either express lane option with then converted to rail.
So you, if I could follow up, Madam Chair, so you're maintaining that if we build automobile lanes now, that we could convert them to transit lanes, and how soon could we do that if Metro wanted it? In other
I don't
words,
think there's a prescribed.
but if you
timeframe
build
for
them,
that. I
aren't-
think that would be more in keeping with the time frame for a future rail transit.
so if they're built, is there any guarantee that if Metro had a miracle and had money in 5 years and interest in expanding, that it could be done then? Or once we build them, are they not going to say that they have to have them for 90 years or 10 years or 20 years?
You're speaking more of like if it was a term in the agreement, if these were built by a concessionaire.
Yeah, I don't know who's building them, if the state is or a concessionaire.
That hasn't been determined
Yeah.
yet. The project is in the study phase right now, and that's the only portion of the project that's
Okay.
currently funded. And so if the project would potentially move forward as a P3 project that has private concessionaire type funds, then one alternative that was implemented on the 66, Transform 66 project, for instance, was there was a term written into that contract where at a certain horizon year, transit can be implemented. And that is not a compensation event. That means not a pay, it's not a
Well,
penalty.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
Distinct.
I'm just concerned that we could end up with automobile lanes that we could have a hard time switching back to transit lanes, which is how a lot of people thought those were going to be reserved for. And I hope that the study will indicate if there's any option to preserve them for transit all along, rather than just make them automobile lanes. That we have that option.
And that could be, as I mentioned, that could be one of the options that would be part of, if they move forward as a public-private partnership,
Yeah.
that could be one of the terms, if you will, that is in that
Okay.
agreement.
Well, I just hope it's thoroughly evaluated to preserving it for transit, all options there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Eben. And I think that addresses some of the public comment we also received, so appreciate that. Yes, Mr.
Yeah,
Alcorn.
just to follow up on that, I think you raise a great point, and thank you for flagging the contract to the agreement for any future P3 provider, because those are tough contracts. I mean, those are long-term. I believe how many years is it's 80 years sometimes, right?
Transurban with 80.
Yeah, Transurban 80 years. So we're talking well beyond.
66.
We're talking well beyond the long term, 2045. We're I mean, beyond any of our lives. Yeah, I would definitely want to see if it does to go down that path, that to be written into the contract, not as a compensation event, and and make it clear that this could be potentially, because who knows, in 30, 40, 50 years, it doesn't pin out right now, but it very well might.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you. Just on slide 11, I'm trying to understand. So you have three lanes that right now are the through lanes. Maybe there's 2 through lanes currently. And slide 11, so you have the 2 lanes that would be the tolled express lanes and or 1 transit lane. Is it necessary, and why is it necessary to preserve one of the through lanes as a general purpose lane? Am I understanding the slide correctly that one of the 3 through lanes is preserved as a general purpose lane? on the transit side of the concrete barrier?
Yes, that's how the graphic is set up right now. That is a general purpose or through lane.
So I mean, could you not achieve 2 express lanes while permanently preserving a third lane for transit? Or is there some design reason that you must have one general purpose through lane on that side of the concrete barrier, which I understand can't be moved?
There are some lane balance requirements that we have to meet
Okay.
with federal highway requirements, and so that's why the graphic was kind of set up in this fashion, but the overall illustration was with the preliminary alternative concepts that we're looking at, the maximum amount of additional lanes, express or general purpose, is 2 that we're looking at. So we wanted to illustrate that if we added those 2 express lanes, in both directions, that one of those could be then converted to a rail option in the future. There is physical space on the structure to allow for that.
Barring any objection by the Federal Highway Administration, in theory, you could have on that side of the concrete barrier 2 express lanes and 1 lane preserved for transit and not utilized until that transit comes to fruition.
In theory, there is physical room for that lane count. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question. Other questions on this? Oh, yes. Ms. Bagley, go ahead. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I mean, just to be sure that I understand, my concern there is, does it create a scenario where everybody who wants to use the through lane has to pay for it? If you don't have a general purpose lane on the through lane side of the barrier?
On the bridge, at least.
On the bridge, right? So
It would still be 4 through lanes. But you would
But
be
in that
removing
scenario,
4.
you would be removing one,
yeah,
adding an extra.
And that's what I was talking about. There's a little bit of lane balance that has to happen with certain projects.
yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad to sort of have that at least drawn out of the possibility. My question was kind of going back a few slides to the purpose and the need on slide 6. And I guess the purpose feels in, the way it's designed is to result in more lanes. And I guess I'd like to, in the interest of, is more cars going faster in light of emissions and safety, if we presuppose that in the purpose statement, how are we then balancing in issues of equity, issues of environment, issues of safety? If we're presupposing that the purpose is to have a continuous express lane system?
It is an express lanes study. We are doing a NEPA evaluation. So we have 10 alternatives right now preliminarily that we're taking comment on now. You see that all 10 of those are not 10 express lanes alternatives. So as part of that, we are looking at different alternatives in that suite of alternatives. So they're all not express lane alternatives.
I appreciate that. I think it's, it feels like when the purpose is to result in the continuity of lanes, that feels like where the study is, intended versus having it be in the menu of options that in which it's included. And the concern, and I know some Alexandrians have, is, we're trying to some extent to reduce what we see as invitation, inducing demand of, onto that road that tends to feed up through some of our streets or off of some of our streets. And we're trying to induce people actually out of single occupancy vehicles into buses, into transit. And so I'm just hoping and expressing early in this process, that we really are considering some of these alternatives and considering,
that the outcome isn't presupposed into, express lanes and continuous express lanes. And one thing I didn't really see, and I apologize if I missed it, is there an environmental element here? Is there an element that will weigh in which of these alternatives is most likely to reduce the ultimate, emissions produced by the cars traversing these lanes versus, standard model lanes?
So we are getting to that phase of the study. That'll be the next phase when we narrow down the 10 alternatives that we have now to a more refined range of alternatives. We will start to do a more detailed environmental analysis that will study some of the things you just mentioned, like air quality, noise impacts, more detailed right-of-way impacts, and then some of the other things that fall under the NEPA umbrella, like cultural resources, stream and wetlands, all of those things.
I appreciate that. And I just want to acknowledge Mr. Brohl and the clear acknowledgement here that to date, this study doesn't foreclose any potential metro and rail impacts. Again, I know people are really eager to see the growth of those systems. And, as we move forward and as we get closer to a contract and the way those terms would specifically impact that, just want to be sure that we don't, inadvertently take steps that complicate that effort in the future.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Bagley. I can speak for my oath. I do have, sorry, Mr. Guerra, then Chairman McKay, who else had, and then Mr. Stiles, go ahead. I will try to bring in a comment at some point as well. Go ahead.
So my comments actually back on slide 11. My concern is actually spacing for the shoulder. So in my experience, I've actually blown a tire out on 495 going north, and I was in the express lanes, and thankfully there was enough of the shoulder. Otherwise, I would have been changing my tire on the pylons, which would be less than ideal. And I was also on 495 going across the bridge where I was stuck for an hour because there was literally nowhere to go. And there was nothing on the side that you could go through because cars were piling up and they were blocking the emergency vehicles from going. So emergency egress and shoulders are kind of important to me when I'm looking at this. And I have concerns there. So is there anything that you guys can speak to on that?
We're really early on, so this is, again, just a graphical representation. So I don't have design level details to speak to what would be a final shoulder.
Yeah, so to that point, I mean, I did speak to someone when they were at Alexandria. They were basically saying the shoulder would be minimal at best. And again, when it comes to the tire blows out and you pull out to the side or emergency egress. So I would like to see more information in that as we move forward.
And that will come as we continue to move forward with the details of the study.
Mr. McKay.
Yeah, just a few thoughts. First, we had a full briefing of this at NDTA, and so I do appreciate the time you're taking to come out and brief us on this. I would just say, because Ms. Bagley raised the equity point, I would just say that the current configuration is an example of one of the worst inequities in Northern Virginia. This is the only segment of our interstate system in Fairfax County that provides zero transit benefit today. And the fact that these lanes stopped at Springfield to begin with, when the rest of the Beltway work was being done, did transit a major disservice, not to mention the fact that it ignored, in my opinion, everything east of 495. And so I think there were some socioeconomic reasons for that that were, I'll just say, kind of deplorable. So when we talk about equity, the fact that this is a system that has express lanes, but no transit benefit. We have express lanes with a transit benefit throughout the Beltway, all up and down 66, all up and down 95 now in Fairfax County and Northern Virginia, albeit they shouldn't be reversible in some of those areas. But to me, ignoring transit in this area would be the worst mistake we could make. And so what I like about this is we're finally talking about giving transit a benefit on this last segment of the Beltway where it is desperately needed. So when we think about equity, I think we do need to keep that in mind. The question that I have is on, and I raised this at MDTA. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this now. There's a no build alternative. Then there's this TSM TDM alternative, and then there's the part-time shoulder use. I just want to get this on the record again, in terms of the current configuration that's out there, should this project not move forward for whatever reason, is there something between the no build, TSM, TDM, and part-time shoulder use that is also looking at other infrastructure improvements that could improve safety and throughput in this section of 495 should the express lanes not move forward? The dropped lanes, the other things that cause the existing gridlock that's out there now. In other words, is that one of the alternative concepts, or would those projects be wrapped into a TSM, TDM? I don't think it would, or a part-time shoulder use exclusive look.
So our study is looking at the alternatives that are presented this evening. If our study doesn't move forward to, a real project, and there are other spot safety improvements that are identified that could be easily implemented, there are some other avenues that those projects could likely be explored. Now, whether there's funding immediately available for those or not, we would have to explore that option too, but there could be some avenues to look for opportunities to implement some smaller safety fixes if those are identified through our study process.
Potentially within the scope of what's being reviewed.
We're not actively seeking out to identify, but if they come to light, that would be something.
Public comment or other, okay. And then the only other thing I would just say from an equity standpoint as well, this segment of roadway is not only was it not included in the express lanes, but it is situated right in between. There's a piece of this that's right in between the boundary of the original Woodrow Wilson Bridge project area and the Springfield Mixing Bowl project area that was ignored when both of those two projects happened. So as a result of it, you have neighborhoods up in that section of 495 that never got a sound analysis, never got a noise wall analysis, never got anything out of those two projects. And so with this project, those things will be looked at for that section that got no attention, that's stuck in between two mega projects. Is that right?
We will do a very high level noise analysis as we refine our range of alternatives. If the project does eventually gain funding and move forward to a construction project, there would be a detailed noise analysis at the time of the actual construction to determine, final locations for noise abatement.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Skiles?
And it's more of an editorial comment than anything, but I think when you look at the express lanes network that is developed in Northern Virginia and elsewhere, one can say that doesn't induce traffic. The other point that could be made is that it helps incentivize transit, since now you have a dedicated lane. We've seen that on 95, we're seeing that on 66. This commission spends millions of dollars per year on revenue that's generated because of express lanes on transit projects in the region. So, I think when we talk about the importance of transit, it is a critical component to our regional transportation system. And that ultimately is enhanced because we have a vibrant express lanes network that provides folks with choices that they didn't have before. So it's just an editorial comment as we discuss this.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Were there other hands up?
I just have a quick.
Yeah, and then go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. With no public sort of discussion in Maryland about hot limits at this point, at any kind of serious level, at least publicly, how does that influence how you look at the various alternatives?
Maryland has been involved with our process from the beginning. We have representatives that have been part of the study team, and they continue to provide us input as we move forward in our study process.
They're a partner. Maryland State Highway Administration are a partnering or a cooperating agency as part of the study. As Michelle said, we've been meeting with them throughout the entire duration of the study. We meet at least weekly, if not more. So they have many opportunities to provide the input. And then they're looking at everything we're doing, each step of the study, looking at it from the standpoint of, what's going to be acceptable to them and the Maryland residents. It is a Virginia led.
Well, that's, that was gonna be my next question. So with that said, is there a certain weight you put on comments coming in from the state of Maryland and their residents? I mean, or is it solely weighted toward this is a Virginia project and this is our priority?
I mean, I think the focus is on working collaboratively together so it could be successful. I mean, our traffic studies tell us that the major area that's congested is between Route 1 and 295 in Maryland. And so it's that section of this 11-mile corridor. So there could be benefits, on the Maryland side, just as much as on the Virginia side. So our goal is
I'm
collaborative.
trying to understand
Yeah,
how.
but I guess at the end
They
of the
seem to be
day,
pretty
it's a VDOT-led project
far
or
along.
study, I should say.
Well, yeah, of course, but. Okay.
I have one additional question, if that's all right, and one for Jen as well, looking at the presentation. So I think a lot was brought up about the project and making it clear that would not preclude, though we need to really understand and follow how the contract would move forward. On page 6 of your study, you have the 1, 2, 3, 5 stated purposes and needs. And I see a few of them addressed, a couple, and they may have been addressed in other places that I think are very critical are the reducing congestion, improving travel reliability, as well as the improving safety. And so for both of those, I think clearly we see crash data that is concerning as we look at some of this. And then the reliability, I think understanding what part of that we're looking at, reducing congestion and reliability across all lanes versus just in the express lanes. I don't know if you have more information on that or if that's being looked at in the study.
Well, I think we've seen from the operation of the other express lanes in the region that they do reduce congestion on our general purpose lanes. And anytime we can reduce congestion on a roadway, that puts less vehicles on a segment of road. So it is a crash reduction inducing phenomenon, if you will. So that is inherently, a safety increase for our roadway network.
If you all have more of that, if you could share that with us, I know we get questions about, is that still the case?
We have it, specifically related to the 495 Northern Extension, where our traffic analyses told us or indicate that there will be a reduction in crashes and in safety improvements, both on the Beltway itself and on several of the local roads.
And I don't know if at this point you have, I think people have been asking us and my constituents for the real time data, the actuals, as opposed to those studies. So
For 66 or
66, yes, correct. Or yes, and 495 South, you have that. But if you have that for 66, I know I've been asked for that specifically related to the congestion on those lanes.
we can look into that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
I will move on. I have a separate question for Jen, just on the maps, but on the because we are a little bit behind time, I want to go ahead and thank all of you for your time today. I did not see any further questions or comments. We really appreciate you being here. As Renee said, always good to see you, Michelle. Big shoes to fill. Thank you for being there temporarily. I know Susan will be greatly missed. And thank you so much, Jen DeBro, for your comments. Thank you so much. As a reminder, we're going to move next to item 6, the WMATA report, before turning to the program advisory committee items. Sorry, here we go. I do have that here. On behalf of the entire commission, I want to congratulate WMATA Board Chair Paul Smedberg, as he has been awarded the 2023 Outstanding Public Transportation Board Manager Award by the American Public Transportation Association for his vision, leadership, and commitment. I know he looks surprised right now to transit. I understand that the award itself will be presented next week. And I believe Ms. Matthijs will be able to be there as well with you for that presentation. So just on behalf of all of us here today, we're so excited you could be here for this part of our meeting. We just really want to congratulate you, Paul. As we all know, Metro presented, that was the fun part of the presentation.
Yeah.
As we all know, Metro presented an updated budget forecast for FY 2025 that does look a bit more promising than we saw earlier this year. We're so happy to have you both here with us. Of course, we still have many steps to go as Metro refines its budget. And we do know we have some constraints here in Virginia, even if we wanted to accept a larger bill from Metro. But of course, it's best to get grounded on the facts. And as usual, we have our WMATA board members, Chair Smedberg and Matt Letourneau here with us to give their report. And we'll also hear from WMATA Committee Chair Walter Alcorn to follow with his report. And I appreciate those of you who were able to attend and participate in the WMATA committee meeting. And there will be the joint legislative and WMATA committee later this month. It's this month, yes,
Yep.
we're in October. So to that, let me turn it over to Paul and Matt, if you'd like to give us your report.
Yeah, I think Matt is going to go, Matt, as many of you know, is the finance chair of the WMATA board. So Matt's going to give the main focus of our report.
I will.
Sorry, before you start, I want to thank all of you for holding your questions. So Leanne, in the last presentation, we will do the same here because it's such a happy meeting.
I will start with just a fun comment though, which is that truly, Paul is incredibly deserving of that recognition for really since I've been on the board, but just look at the last year of what our board has kind of undergone in certain situations and such a unified group thanks to his leadership. So I cannot be with him next week. I wish I could be, but I know Kate will be representing all of us, and I really am incredibly happy for you, Paul. So I'm going to talk about the budget. And, you know, I every time I talk about this, it's like always some degree of bad news. So I feel like this time bringing a little better news. And let's start with, I think, maybe the most significant thing, which is the work that Metro has done to really dig deep in the organization and find savings, specifically one-time savings in FY23 and FY24 of $95 million. And then an additional savings, we have a cost efficiency task force that's been working on identifying reoccurring avenues of savings, and an additional $50 million coming from that, which would start in FY25. So we know that there is essentially an ask coming for more funding, and we'll get into that in a minute. But we've been asked to and have taken seriously digging deep within our organization and trying to find absolutely everything we can do to run more efficiently. While at the same time running more service than we've ever run in the history of Metro, which is currently the case. You all know, I think by now, about the structural financial challenge, both capital and operating. We started this discussion with the $750 million deficits. I mentioned the operational efficiencies, cost efficiencies, so that takes us down a little bit. We are adjusting our forecast for revenue for FY24 upwards by 45 million. Very thankful that we have thus far avoided a government shutdown. However, events over the past week do not instill confidence about the long-term ability to forego a government shutdown. So I will note that the revenue forecast discussion could be significantly impacted. I'm sure most of you thought of that already, but if there is a government shutdown, that will affect Metro's bottom line, and that will kind of eat into where we thought we were going with revenue as a result of increased ridership that we're seeing. So that kind of leaves us with a few other options to reduce the budget as much as we can on our side, reduce the deficit, with specifically preventive maintenance. This is a topic that we've talked about before. What Metro's looked at is essentially what's the maximum amount of preventive maintenance transfer that could be put into the operating budget while still maintaining the system in a safe and reliable manner. So when we talk about moving preventive maintenance over, it should be said very clearly that doing so will not prevent the type of maintenance that has to occur to make the system safe. It will still occur. But it would be flexing even more of what the federal government is now providing. And there was additional funding from the federal government coming from IIJA into the operating budget. And what that does long-term is it accelerates the capital funding crisis. I think we've talked a lot about the operating funding crisis, but I know this group is also familiar with the fact that, we're going to reach a point where all of the money that we've gotten in dedicated funding is actually going to be going just toward debt service on all of the projects that we've completed, which is a good thing. It means those things are completed, but we're going to need more money. So this capital money that is essentially being sort of flexed in is not available for some of those projects, and that will accelerate the time period in which we are running out of capital funding by a couple of years, depending on how long we do this for. So management is presented us with 3 scenarios: $60 million, which is our historical preventive maintenance flex. Scenario B is 199. Scenario C is 345, which is the maximum amount. If we did the maximum amount, then that would reduce the deficit to about 365 million. And, just rough numbers, if you think about our contributions being roughly a third between DC, Maryland, Virginia, then it's, somewhere over 100 million for Virginia. So that deficit would have to be closed. The impact of not doing all of this is service reductions. The service reductions would not be equal because of the equity analysis that we would have to go through, and any change to service. We expect that the Virginia service would actually be degraded more than other parts of the system. So you could be looking at as much as 50 or 60% reductions in service instead of 40%. So we are aware, of course, of the 3% cap that exists. We continue to have discussions with DRPT about ways to deal with that, whether it be legislative or through administrative action. But one of our arguments is that the cap should be essentially reset, that we should re-baseline what the subsidy is. Because a component of the funding gap is money that Metro did not collect during the pandemic, which has now sort of, once that was taken out, then we're compounded by what will be 4 fiscal years. That dollar amount is actually equivalent now of $680 million. And that's just from the sort of pandemic era reductions in subsidy that Metro did for jurisdictions. So I think that's a good argument for a new baseline. So, should that occur, whether it be administrative or legislative, we need to deal with the 3% cap, at least on a temporary basis, to get us through this next fiscal year and potentially the year after. Ultimately, this does not change the need for a long-term solution. I actually think it could be helpful to sort of collapse the operating and capital discussions into the same time period, because the fix that we need is going to be for both. And I think we've always talked about the fact that we can't go get our operating solution in place and then 2 years later come back and say, well, we have a capital funding problem too. So if we did put this much of preventive maintenance into the budget, then that might kind of force that discussion earlier. The general manager continues to work to find savings. There could be some other things on the table. This really is not inclusive of any discussion around fare. We can have that discussion. I think what we typically see with fare is when you increase fares, you see a reduction in ridership, and that kind of offsets a lot of the revenue gain, but there are still probably some revenue positive things. And the good news is the work we did last year to sort of reset the fare structure and kind of come up with a more manageable structure makes it easier to make fare adjustments in the future. And we've heard from people like Secretary Miller that they're going to want to see those kind of proposals be seriously discussed for Metro. So that's kind of the situation as it stands right now. The Metro Board got a presentation on all this last week. There's a lot more detailed information should anybody want it. We get into some of these specific cost things. Inflation, of course, had a big part of it. Our labor contracts, necessitated significant labor wage increases as a result of inflation. So that kind of accelerated all of this, but there's different components and all that sort of thing. And then we can get into a more detailed discussion and continue to flesh this out. Timeline wise, the general manager will present his proposed budget in December, and then we'll have kind of our usual process. We will probably, depending on how the 3% discussion goes, and depending on whether this is something that it looks like could be handled administratively versus legislatively, Metro very well may be in a position where we have to assume that there will be no lifting of the 3% cap at the time the budget is proposed. I mean, we almost know nothing's going to happen before January, right? So therefore, that will trigger a process. It will be a painful process that will make headlines because Metro will have to issue warn notices to employees. That's just the timeline and what we have to go through because we can't assume that we're going to have the money in time for the fiscal year. So that's sort of the scenario.
And that warrant process takes 6 months.
Yep.
You need a 6-month lead.
Thank you.
All right, and I just have a few announcements.
Go
before we take
ahead,
questions.
just to let everyone know, we will have also Walter's presentation before we do all the questions.
So just a few things. Matt and I met with Secretary Miller, DRP Director Jabrul, Deputy Secretary Sargent down in Richmond. We had a good discussion about Metro and the future and state involvement, and so it was a good discussion. The GM and I, Randy Clark, on October 17th, will be testifying and interacting with the Commonwealth Transportation Board here in Northern Virginia. They have their meeting, which is in conjunction with the Governor's Transportation Conference. Dulles, you may have seen, had its millionth rider just a few days ago. So since the opening in November, the millionth rider went through gate. Matt was there.
Matt was there.
Some other folks.
3 million on phase 2 extension and 1 million at the Dulles Airport Station.
They really could have a millionth rider.
We selected a woman who had arrived from Tokyo, who was an excellent sport.
They were hoping it was going to go the other way.
And she came through and was greeted with a huge press contingent and some very nice. It's a $100 trip card with a smart trip card, which I said can get her 50 trips on the weekends back and forth to Dulles. $500 from the Airports Authority, and maybe the greatest gift of them all for those of us who are points geeks, a year membership to the United Club for her and a companion. So it's courtesy of United Airlines.
Wondering why you
Not bad.
there.
And then one last thing, a little bit on the derailment that took place a little over a week ago now. I'm sure you all heard about it in the news. One of our 3000 series cars lost a rivet or a bolt, fell on the track, caused the train to derail out of an abundance of caution.
The next train.
The next train. I'm sorry, the next train. And just so people know, and I didn't know. I mean, I knew some of this, but not all this. A train could lose half its brakes and still be able to stop within all the safety tolerances and on the platforms and everything. So just as a factoid, I didn't know that, and when we were debriefing on a bunch of this, it was something that came out. I didn't know. Anyway, so the 7000 series car derailed. There was clear, derailment with the two sets there. Nothing with that train was faulty. Our safety team and the safety commission were immediately called. They were there. Out of an abundance of caution, Randy and I talked. He and the safety team pulled the 2 and 3000 series cars out for immediate inspection. I think they had 50 bolts that they wanted to tighten and check. Those vehicles are 40 plus years old. Well, some are 38 years old. So
80s.
Yeah. So, they have been workhorses. It is amazing. Honestly, when our 7000 series fleet was out of commission, that these things perform the way they did. And that's a tribute to the workers of WMATA, really, keeping these vehicles in good shape. So, but it's all good. Safety Commission seems to be okay. And we're moving forward.
I honestly thought that this would be the topic that we would be talking about
Yeah.
tonight when this happened. But I think the team did an excellent job. The passengers were uploaded within 30 minutes. And then you probably all saw the video that was released within hours that showed exactly what happened. So that really kind of proved what we were saying. And now at this point, I think going forward.
It's all good.
Thank you. I know the communication, transparency, and the quick fix is definitely
Yeah.
appreciated.
Yep.
I will go to Mr. Alcorn for
Okay,
the.
thank you very much, Madam Chair. Brief report. So the WMATA committee met on September 21st and got an update on MVTC's Metro operating funding and forum working group, which I think everybody knows is the staff level working group on these issues, the issues Matt was talking about a few minutes ago. So this also, they're going to be the findings of the working group. They're going to be developed into a technical report, and they will also inform the recommendations in the annual report that we do on the performance and condition of WMATA. So the findings and recommendations, they've been structured into 5 categories: structural cost growth, operational and financial accountability, oversight, structural funding deficit, and capital and other. So a few of the key recommendations are included in everybody's written report. So the commission will also be briefed on this annual report and the recommendations in November. So that's coming up next month. The next NVTC WMATA committee meeting is scheduled for October 19th at 6 p.m. And this is going to be the joint meeting with the NVTC Legislative and Policy Committee. And that's there are going to be several important topics covered there, including the continuation of our discussion about the financial outlook of WMATA, the 3% cap, and also draft recommendation for the annual report of WMATA, and also some revenue options for long-term sustainable funding for WMATA. As always, all commissioners are welcome and encouraged to come. That's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And first of all, before we turn to questions and comments, really, again, first of all, congratulations to you, Paul, and thank you, Paul and Matt, absolutely for your leadership on the board. I think for pressing WMATA leadership to reduce management costs while also identifying other funding that can help reduce the subsidy requests that will be coming. I think we are all happy to see this moving in the right direction. We are very much committed to us, but know that this financial plan, while it's a short-term plan, is a little bit more palatable as we move forward.
And I would just want to say, Madam Chair, I think the board is definitely aware of the challenges you all have at the local level, and also we know what's happening at the Commonwealth level, but also in the District of Maryland too. They are dealing with very similar issues, similar challenges. So it's going to take everyone, coming together and sitting at the table, not just people like around this table, but the business community, riders, everyone, elected leaders at the state level to really come forward. We've been also briefing our federal delegation, so they are all fully aware of what's happening, and we've had good meetings with them, the JAM and I, and we're so fortunate to have the federal delegation that gets it and is really supportive. Will do what they can at the right time.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I really very much appreciate that. I know you and many at this table, including Ms. Matthijs and others, are very much involved in that work. And I think what everyone coming to the table with what they can do to help us get there to the next steps.
Yeah, and I think we need the groups to come together, put aside competition or egos, whatever it is, to really come together and do a good solution long term.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, to that. I think rolling up our sleeves, and you all have done that. So I want to thank you. I think we all doing that really want to thank Mr. Alcorn and the WMATA committee for the work they are doing. I think it's showing we all very much committed and as a region and as a state, Metro is very important to all of us. Congratulations on the millionth rider. And I think from what you shared, want to reiterate the importance of understanding that shifting some of that preventive maintenance will not impact the safety. I think we all understand and agree that safety and reliability are absolutely.
Yeah, all the
key
state
for
of good
riders.
repair, all the safety programs, everything stays in place. That does not change.
Excellent. Yeah, Matt, you want
I was just gonna say the general manager just texted some pictures from Morgan Boulevard. So we have a new partnership with the Commanders that you may have seen, a 5-year partnership. Evidently, a lot of fans taking advantage of that tonight. And the great thing is $100 million annually, and actually, yeah, money is coming to WMATA as part of an advertising agreement. I can't remember exactly what was announced and what wasn't, but anyway, revenue's coming in and we're providing service, and it's a good model.
That's excellent. We appreciate it. I know that was one of the areas we've discussed is additional revenue sources. So congratulations on that. Very much appreciate that. And I will go ahead and just pause right now and open up to comments. And I believe I had Mr. McKay first, Mr. DeFranchi, and then Mr. Turner.
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, I think so first of all, you were on a panel at the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance with me recently. I think several people were here. Fascinating conversation about the future of Metro. And I think, one of the takeaways for all of us should be that we may have a short-term solution that the jurisdictions can work on. But the elephant is still in the room, and there's no way to reduce our way out of this without some new, what I would consider to be dedicated long-term solution here. So I appreciate that COG and VTC, some of the working groups are working together on this, but ultimately it's going to be really important that nobody take a step backwards just because there's some short-term relief here. And that's my greatest concern. I know that the COG work group is supposed to be finished. I want to say it's in the April-May timeframe. It's not right around the corner. And the CAOs have a separate work group at COG that I know is working from a more technical standpoint. And so obviously, all eyes are going to be on the election in November in Virginia as to where we go from here. But this is all of our responsibility. And I think it's important that, we just stay as focused as we are on this and not act as if due to all the good work of Randy, the WMATA board, to reduce some of these numbers, to move some numbers around that don't affect state of good repair, that's not a solution. Right. So that's a short-term bridge, but not a solution to the bigger problem here. And the concern I have is that anyone walks away thinking, oh, we fixed it and everything is okay now, because it's not. And so I think it just, really important for all of us to stay engaged on this and be paying attention to it. I do think when the COG work group is finished with their product, I don't know what their final product is going to be. If it's just a report, if it's a recommendation, whatever it is, but it's going to be really important for us to be thinking about what the next step is after that. Because we know when that report's coming due. I'll be frank with everyone here and tell you, I'll be shocked if there's anything in that everyone sitting around this room doesn't already know. And so we should not be shy about thinking about, solutions in the interim, because I don't think there's a secret magic bullet here that's going to come out of the COG report. And we're all going to look at it and say, wow, that's the answer. Why didn't we think of that? And so just a long way of saying, stay tuned. This is all of our responsibility, and VTCs should be playing a major role in this. And that we need to not take our foot off the gas just because we have a bridge right now.
Madam Chair.
Very well stated. Yes.
Jeff, I think that is exactly the challenge is going to be if there is a short-term fix, if you will, that people could lose interest, then we cannot let that happen. We have to get to that long-term solution. And now is the time. We've known this model has been broken for what, 30, 40 years now?
Since it started.
Since the start. That's right. The report from the beginning said it was broken. And it is just not, sustainable. And, this region cannot walk away from that investment. And, they've got to get it right. I think people do have this sort of sense of a two-tier or two-phase approach to things to get to that long term. But I think Matt also made a good point tonight where we have to join not only the operating, but the capital at the same time. We got to, if possible, to fix both of those at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to have to come back to that. Yeah, sorry, I had Mr. Brown.
That visionary thinking, I think, is really important. I think back at the beginning, Mr. Letourneau, you said, I'm here with relatively good news, and then the news sounded tough to me, so I'm glad that, I do think even with the shift, which thank you both for your leadership on it, I think we still have a lot of work to do in the short term, as you guys really know, but rebaselining is something that I think we need to be thinking about. But just like saying Metro can fix it all itself, rebaselining, because our budgets are all we're facing, it's going to be a very difficult budget year for, I think, every locality. There has to be, I think we need to be, and certainly the elections will have a big impact, but I think that there's a state role that we also have to be willing to share out loud. In addition to us stepping up, there's a state role. And so, I guess there's a question for staff. I can envision, we don't precise scores on how much, what rebaselining would mean does not seem to me advisable, but getting a sense of what it means does seem important to me, because I do think there's a risk that otherwise it's all the localities that should fix this when we are providing 1.5 billion in revenue to the state. So I don't know. I think this question, it could be for you, Kate, Ms. Mattice, or Andrew, you may get the glory of doing some of this, but is this do you have any thoughts on that type of a question of, as we consider what rebaselining might mean, how we can try to, for the short-term issues we need to address, provide like a little fiscal context for what we think could be reasonable, so that we're really looking at the metro, local, and state portions of all this. I don't know if that sort of analysis is something that, I feel like that's something that maybe we could do perhaps better than COG, or as well as COG, and I'm just wondering if that's something that you're thinking about.
Well, Madam Chair, we are obviously working with the jurisdictions to really dive in. This is an iterative process. As Mr. Letourneau, Mr. Spedler say, there's still a number of things that Metro will be looking into in the coming months. So I think that's going to be very helpful as they get closer to releasing that budget. But I do know all the localities are going back and looking at the revenues they have. And seeing what's available, whether state aid, gas tax, or within there. So that is an active conversation. So I do not have any answers at all. But perhaps just to be assured that everybody is looking at it. I know the Metro folks are looking at it, as well as the localities are looking at what does that picture look like. But I think that's going to be an iterative, and obviously through this board moving forward and our feedback to WMATA on their budget and how that aligns to the ability to pay subsidies is going to be something we're going to need to continue to be engaged on.
Great.
If I can follow up on that, I think there is one question that we do have. It's been brought up, whether it's going to be administrative or legislative, but if you could clarify for us, or Andrew, if the 3% cap is not temporarily lifted, what is the loss of state revenue to Metro?
So the code says that that if the operating subsidy from WMATA that comes to Virginia as a whole, which of course can go up and down in different jurisdictions, exceeds 3% from the year before, and there are some exceptions associated with that, that the Commonwealth will withhold 35% of state aid. And that is state aid that comes to our jurisdictions that help support their ability to pay WMATA. So the penalty from the Commonwealth is to the NBTC jurisdictions.
Thank you. And I think when we bring up the state and the importance, that is critical, that 35% aid being withheld. And so absolutely why that has to be in the
Great
conversation.
question. I want to share, but I also don't want to not give Matt, or you may not want to comment.
Well,
but
no,
if you
the only
just-
thing I'll say is, so I think what we've been asked to do at Metro is to be really transparent with our numbers. And I think the process that's going on now is sort of one of validation that what we're sharing is accurate. So there's been extensive meetings. I think for the region, the DC Chief Financial Officer is kind of taking the lead, kind of on behalf of all the administrative officers on looking at these numbers very closely. Not that the others are not, but you know, they have kind of a particular function in the district government. So I know there was a meeting this week. There was several last week with the CFO's office. And I think the direction from the board to management is to be as, you know, transparent as possible, allow them to understand exactly how Metro is getting to these numbers. So that process has to take place. And then we kind of move into more of the solutions discussion, which, you know, I think we have to get everybody over that first hurdle first.
Yep, thank you.
Sorry, I had Mr. Turner and then Ms. Garvey. I skipped you.
Thank you. Matt, when you briefed us the other night at the board meeting, a red flag went on the back of my head, and it wasn't until you just now briefed it, I figured out what it was. So I get to tell a brief Air Force story. During Vietnam, the fighter squadron combined, the squadron commander controlled ops and maintenance. So the maintenance troops and the pilots were all in the same squadron. And what they found when they first deployed over there is that the airplanes were breaking so much they couldn't fly the missions. And so the Air Force started training the leaders of the squadrons. You got to knock this off. When your maintenance guys say you got to do preventive maintenance, you got to sit down and do prevent. And they said, yeah, fine. And then they go out and fly more missions. And he finally said, split them up. So that it became a fighter squadron commander was in charge of the pilots, and an aircraft maintenance unit commander was in charge of maintenance. And they reported separately to the wing commander. And it was that way for 20 years. My squadron in F-111s in New Mexico was the first squadron that recombined ops and maintenance because they think they had it figured out. And we were all in the same building, who had 350 maintenance guys along with the pilots. And I left, I was an ops officer for 2.5 years, and I left and went to the Pentagon. And I called back in a couple of years and I said, yeah, it's still broken. They had to split them again. And to this day, they're broken. They're split up again because the ops guys don't do the preventive maintenance. So when you brief that we're going to rob the preventive maintenance budget, and believe me, I'm totally where you are. I understand that you've got an obligation to make the system work the best way you can. I'm totally on board with that. It's just there are unintended, barely perceivable indicators when you start using preventive maintenance and playing with your preventive maintenance schedule that has a long-term, very subtle and insidious impact on your operations that can really affect your brand downstream, where things start to break, little things here, little things there, that can really creep up on you. And it really gives me pause when you go after ops, you feed the ops budget with preventive maintenance stuff. I don't know if we got any options. I totally get that. And the only other unintended consequences, what the chair pointed out just a minute ago, is we're doing our due diligence and our professional, best professional thing that we can do to do this and come up with these options. But I think, and I don't know any way around it, are we inadvertently communicating that it's all okay? We fixed the problem. Everything's fine. So that we're creeping towards this cliff. When it finally says this is not okay anymore, we really drop off the cliff. I don't know the answer. I just wish we could kind of selectively fail little pieces with highly visible neighborhoods, so like congressmen and senators, so that they get the news pretty early rather than the rest of us. But that's all I do.
All right, hopefully failure is not an option, but point well taken. Yes, Ms.
Actually, on the same theme. So listening to Jeff's warning about not taking the foot off the gas, and then thinking about y'all talking about the warn notice that might come out and how dire that would be. Should that happen, and it sure is looking a lot more likely to, is that actually a teachable moment that we might use to educate the public about the value of Metro, and so that might be a way to keep the foot on the gas?
Yeah, I was in response. I mean, I'm thinking when Mike said that, I think when the warn notices go out, that will be kind of the flashing indicator. I think you're going to see certainly a reaction from labor on this, you know, and I think it's gonna be important that that reaction not necessarily be directed at Metro, which is what sometimes happens, but instead be directed at kind of outwardly, like, okay, this is Metro's doing this because we don't have our own money. I mean, this is other people's money. So this is kind of the consequence of not having that figured out. And, you know,
We may have some teachable moments coming up, which we need to figure out how to use.
Thank you. I did have Mr. Faust, and we'll probably move on. One more, Mr. Alcorn, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, first of all, thank you. How you do it, but yeah, you do it well.
Thank you.
One of the concerns I have is that, we had a $750 million deficit, and that was gonna grow into the future. And now through a lot of hard work and one-time funding, we've got it down to 350 million. We need to, I think, do multi-year projections because we don't want to downplay how significant our challenge is. And by reducing the deficit to $350 million, that's a good thing. But it's going to be $700 or $800 million falling, and keeps going up from there. So I would just ask that we stop focusing on just, the magic of 1 year and how we can fix 1 year and present the real picture. So a question that we have bonds outstanding. Are they fixed rate or floating rate?
They're fixed rate. Yes, they're fixed rate, and they are paid for out of a essentially a separated out method of funding, which is the annual capital funding that's dedicated by law, can only be used for that purpose. So that's why our credit rating really has not taken a hit during this kind of fiscal cliff, because in theory, and we certainly wouldn't want this, but in theory, we could not have a system and still be paying because of the money we're receiving on those our obligations on those bonds.
It was the first question we got.
Yeah, when Paul and I went out to Wall Street, that was the big message, was kind of how this money is separated out. And it is separated, and that goes to your question too.
Our bonds are fixed rate bonds at some fixed rate of interest. They didn't
Yes.
go up dramatically the
No.
last 12 months.
No, and our most recent bond sale was competitive. It was good.
Excellent. Good. Thank you both.
Mr. Alcorn.
So just very quickly, as we go through this discussion and we look at changing the baseline of subsidies, for whatever reason, I just ask that MVTC staff help with that, not just on the numbers, but also, on the justifications, on, background that, would put it in context, because this is coming right at us pretty fast. And I think getting that to all of us would be very helpful.
Andrew should work 24/7.
Madam Chair, if I could, John, we've also, the manager and I were just talking recently. I think 2-year budgeting would probably be a good thing moving forward. So.
Well, and one other thing I'll put in pitch for is we have no fiscal reserve. We have no fiscal reserve because every dollar we collect in subsidy, we have to use to run the system. So as part of any fix, I would really advocate for allowing us to have, like most of our localities, I'm sure have, because I know we all have good credit ratings, having a 5 or 10% fiscal reserve in case we have, situations like this.
Thank you. Final comment, Ms.
Real quick, I think I sat in on the report and Mr. Alcorn did on the meeting, and Mr. Alcorn didn't talk a whole lot about the report. We had a report presented and it talked about these fiscal things and changes. And one of the recommendations was, which I've been saying for years, is that you two gentlemen should get a salary of some sort that should be reasonable. So thank you for all the work you do. And it's absolutely crazy to expect you to do it for nothing. And so thank you for what you do. And I hope we can fix that while we're doing everything else. It's a drop in the bucket, but in principle, it's really important to me. Anyway, doesn't it make sense to everybody?
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Good to see you all. Have a great trip. And thank you so much, Walter and Andrew, for all your work on it. To that, we will now move on to back to action item 5, the report from our Chair of the Program Advisory Committee, MVTC's Chair, Sarah Bagley, who will give us an update on the last two program advisory committee meetings and introduce the action items and staff presentations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Program Advisory Committee met back in July and was briefed on the Commuter Choice Program. The PAC September meeting focused on the NVTC Zero Emission Bus Regional Strategic Plan. We have all of those topics tonight for the commission. First, we have two actions related to the Commuter Choice Program. I'm going to turn this over to Commuter Choice Senior Program Manager Ben Owen to give an overview of the actions.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Bagley. We'll keep it snappy. Next slide. Our first action is authorization to submit our 2023 Commuter Choice Annual Report to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. This is in support of the reporting requirements of our two corridors memoranda of agreement. We are highlighting three happy superlatives this year. One is the highest daily weekday ridership on our projects, about 6,000 weekday passenger trips on average, a 50% increase over last year. We are kind of an annual basis updating our estimates of the broader regional benefits of our funding to our region's economy and quality of life. Since the program began, so those are continuing to grow. We expect they will continue to grow as more capital projects we funded in recent rounds come online too. Second is the largest funding award cumulatively in program history, a total of $48 million to 13 I-395/95 Commuter Choice projects. These include our first awards for a bus rapid transit line, new rail station construction, and electric bus purchases. And finally, last but not least, the most public engagement in any funding round to date. We had over 600 comment submissions in our recent I-395/95 funding round. And the report does highlight, in their own words, commuters' support for the expanded options provided by our projects. Next slide, to get into the highlights a bit more and for your enjoyment, we did put together a short promotional video, kindly narrated by Ms. Bagley. So Tenley, fire away.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bagley, Commissioner and Program Advisory Committee Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I'm thrilled to share news of a record year for our Commuter Choice program. As traffic volumes surged across Northern Virginia, Commuter Choice played a critical role by moving over 6,000 more people each day through the I-66 inside the Beltway and I-395/95 corridors. That marked a 50% increase over the previous year and a new record for projects we support through the program. Whether people traveled on an express bus service, had easier access to transit stations, or took advantage of one of our incentive programs, Commuter Choice projects provided new and diverse travel options to help avoid the pre-pandemic levels of congestion that returned to our roadways. A partnership between NVTC and the Commonwealth, Commuter Choice is our competitive grant program that reinvests toll revenues into public transit and transportation improvements that move more people more efficiently along our two expressway corridors. This year, NVTC and the Potomac and Rappahannock Transportation Commission approved a record $48 million for 13 projects on the I-395/95 corridor. That included a significant investment in two projects that will provide decades of benefits: a rail station expansion at Crystal City and implementation of bus rapid transit along Richmond Highway in Fairfax County. Commuter Choice provides value to the region beyond offering travel alternatives. Our region's commuters reap numerous rewards from using our projects instead of driving alone. Over 230,000 hours of travel time savings, 21 million fewer vehicles miles traveled, and almost $3 million in fuel cost savings and a more than 2/3 reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We also received record levels of input from the public. More than 600 comments demonstrated overwhelming support for the program and projects under consideration for funding. It reminded me of the crucial role many of the projects we support play in the lives of those who live, work, and play in Northern Virginia. When I travel around our region, I look to make as many trips as I can without having to drive a car. I'm proud to be a part of NVTC's Commuter Choice, an instrumental program in affording travel options and time savings to residents across Northern Virginia.
So afraid they wouldn't have you on the bike. Not to worry. She was hoping they wouldn't.
Cool. So with that, we're happy to take any questions you have on the 2023 Commuter Choice Annual Report.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ben, Adam, Monique. Nathan, I think also worked on it. Thank you, Sarah, for being the star of the show. Chair Bagley, wonderful to see you all. Any questions from our team on the project? All right, well, we got an easy one tonight. Thank you.
Oh, we're not quite done.
Oh, yes, thank you. I know, we're all.
Madam Chair, we do have an
Yes, can I have a motion to authorize the executive director to submit the MVTC Commuter Choice FY 2023 annual report to the Commonwealth Transportation Board?
So moved.
Second.
I heard a motion from Ms. Bagley, second from Mr. Eben. Any conversation, discussion? All right, there's no one online at this point, correct? Right, not. Okay, I will go ahead and do the roll call vote. I believe I have to start with Mr. Broldo. She's online. She is online, okay. So roll call vote, all those in favor. Mr. Brule, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, is that an aye from you?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And I believe, and we don't have Mr. Clementi. Okay, now for the rest of the commission here in the room.
Mr. Clementi vote?
I don't see him there. Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent. The motion passes. And now, Ben, if you could introduce the next action.
Cool. So our second action is authorization to open our next call for projects for I-66 Commuter Choice covering fiscal years 2025 and 26. So last month, Adam briefed you on this call for projects. There is one update, which is to the expected revenue. If you can advance the slides, we'll show it. But basically, we are advertising a range of $40 to $50 million available for new projects. That's based on a closer look we've taken at the toll revenues and concessionaire payments we're reasonably expecting to receive into fiscal year 2026, in addition to the carryover we already have. So we do want to leave some room for programming flexibility for the Program Advisory Committee and the Commission, which is why we're advertising a range here. We did begin engaging with our eligible applicants this summer about what they might apply for, and we'll meet another round of conversations later this month. There are no significant policy changes this time around. Next slide. There is one change, however, to the schedule, which is that we're moving up the application period by a month. Normally, we'd open the call for projects in November, but we are looking to open it tonight. We would open the application period tomorrow. Applications due the end of the day, Monday, December 18th. This is basically to give us a bit more time for the program development process, since there are a number of steps involved in it, just based on our experience in recent rounds. So once the period closes December 18th, we'll move quickly into our eligibility reviews. Thereafter, our technical evaluation of the eligible applications. We will keep the PAC and commission apprised as we move along. But by early April, we expect we'll have a set of scored eligible proposals that we can bring into public comment and back to the PAC for endorsement of a draft program of projects. And thereafter, we'd move into commission and CTV rail and transit subcommittee briefings in May, and bring a program forward in June for adoption. So easy peasy. With that, we're happy to take any questions regarding the I-66 Commuter Choice fiscal year 25-26 call for projects.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. I'm trying to count how many months away. It's quite a few, at least 7 or 8. So
Yeah, it's a ways out there yet.
the ways out there. Really very much appreciate the process and the amount of work going in, and especially the engagement both with our staff and with the public. To that, are there any questions for the team? All right, seeing none, could I have a motion to authorize the executive director to issue the I-66 Commuter Choice FY 2025-26 call for projects? So we have Mr. McKay. I heard a second from Takis. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let me begin with Mr. Brule.
Aye.
Thank you. In the room, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you. Back to Chair Bagley. Thank you so much.
All right, as mentioned, the Program Advisory Committee met again on September 21st and received a briefing from Transit Technology Senior Program Manager Ann McGrain on the draft recommendations for NVTC's Northern Virginia Zero Emission Bus Strategic Plan. And these names. There are 6 bus providers in the NVTC district and OmniRide. While starting and ending service outside of our district, they do travel into the NVTC district for many of their routes. While this many providers and a transit industry rapidly evolving on so many fronts, it only made sense to bring everyone together and figure out how to move the region forward on the topic of zero emission buses. So earlier this year, NVTC embarked on a zero emission bus strategic plan for several reasons. All of our transit agencies are exploring zero emission buses in some way, and some have electric buses in service already. Hey, Dash. Others are using and are exploring compressed natural gas, and the transit industry is starting to explore hydrogen. At the same time, technology is rapidly advancing with all these fuel types, and the federal government is investing an unprecedented amount of money into zero emission buses and infrastructure. The recommendations Anne is about to walk us through will provide the foundation for how NVTC supports all the work our transit agency are doing to advance zero emission buses, which directly support our region's climate goals. Turn it over to Anne.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that great update. I feel like I can skip a few slides. Good evening, everyone. And really just very quickly before I get into some of the details of the recommendations, I will just do a bit of purpose for the plan and the process we've taken to get to this point. So next slide, please. So with all the conversations that are happening at all levels of government, I do want to kind of just like nest our plan within the other processes. So as was just mentioned, at the local level, we have each individual transit agency working towards developing what are called zero emission bus fleet transition plans. And this is really looking at how, existing routes and facilities maybe need to be upgraded or changed to accommodate new technologies and, the costs and operating decisions associated with these changes. And then at the state level, DRPT is working on a toolkit of its own that will help agencies work through their transition process and either to low emission or zero emission fleets. And they're specifically looking at a lot of elements of kind of statewide resources that can be leveraged to help all of the individual transit agencies in the Commonwealth. So our strategic plan really fits in the middle of those two efforts. We're looking at regional collaboration and coordination, really to advance the efforts of what all of our agencies in the region are doing, and hopefully to making sure that we're communicating any, pitfalls that people who are further along in the process have encountered, and lessons learned, just to make sure that as we're all advancing towards this goal of, zero emission technology, we're doing so in kind of the way that's most cost effective and just aware of the resources that need to be expended. And of course, on top of all of this is, unprecedented levels of funding from the federal government for clean transportation technologies, but also a lot of kind of support as well. They offer free technical assistance and are producing a lot of different materials for people as well. And then before I dive further in, I just want to note that I'll be using the term zero emission bus, but really that is to refer to both battery electric buses, BEVs, and also fuel cell electric buses, which are the hydrogen powered electric buses. And that's really like the industry standard for what's considered a zero emission bus. Next slide, please. This is just a quick timeline of what we've been up to in 2023. So we kicked off the strategic plan in February, and since then we've been holding one-on-one conversations with all of the regional transit agencies, convened 2 technical advisory committee meetings with representatives from all of the agencies and DRPT and WMATA. At the same time, our consultant team has evaluated existing conditions, industry trends, and opportunities and challenges in the region. And then throughout this whole process, NVTC, we've also held regular working group meetings for Northern Virginia transit staff engaged in zero emission bus work. And then others have also been holding working group meetings. WMATA has a regional one of the region of DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And then of course, APTA also has one. So this is what has led to the draft regional strategies that I'm going to discuss tonight. And really the goal is to get feedback on these recommendations so that then I can return to the commission in January with a finalized plan. Next slide, please. These are the 6 overarching regional strategies that I'll talk through this evening. I won't go into detail here because I have them each on their own individual slide. But I would be remiss if I don't mention the photo, which is I took a week ago at Fairfax County's ribbon cutting for its first 8 battery electric buses. And it's really just the most recent example of, I think, the many strides that we've seen Northern Virginia transit agencies take just this year in advancing zero emission fleets and lower emission fleets. Of course, with I think other notable examples that we all know being Alexandria, Loudoun, and WMATA receiving low or no emission grant awards from the federal government, and Arlington too recently ordered 4 battery electric buses. So next slide. So this is the first strategy that we're proposing, which is to serve as a regional zero emission bus forum. And then there are 3 actions listed with this strategy. And really what this does is it aims to build upon and strengthen what we're currently doing. And in conversations that we had with local agencies, this was something that many noted as something they appreciated about MVTC's current role as a convener for the region. So, you know, this 1A, you know, is continuing to do things like lead our zero emission bus working group where we share lessons learned, but also participate in these other working groups that are happening within the Mid-Atlantic, within the nation, really learning what we can learn and then pushing it out to the regional partners. 1B, which is to share operational data and findings, would be a new role, but it's really, the goal is to have maybe some sort of dashboard or other mechanism in which, as more agencies in our region are rolling out more zero emission buses, we're making sure that everyone can learn from the knowledge of how these vehicles deal with the climate of our area, the topography of our area, different conditions that really do, especially with something like a battery electric bus, change from region to region. And then whether agencies are converting to battery electric buses or fuel cell electric buses, the reality is that the transition to zero emission buses requires new partnerships and just knowledge of how to work with utilities and fuel providers. So the final action is looking at making sure that we continue to track and coordinate on best practices with utilities, but then also understand how the region's hydrogen supply is developing and kind of becoming more mature. Next slide, please. So the second strategy is to advocate for consistent and supportive zero emission bus standards and policies. So the way I think about it is, while the first strategy was really focused on kind of taking in information from a variety of sources and making sure that our region's transit agencies have everything they need, the second strategy is kind of taking those lessons learned and then making sure that we're advocating and educating external audiences about things that will make the process easier for our local agencies. So 2A, engage with local jurisdictional staff and elected officials to ensure alignment with regional efforts. This is really making sure that as we learn the new things that we're doing education, whether it's for kind of elected officials or staff, but also just the public, of what are some of the challenges that we're encountering with zero emission buses, how we're trying to overcome it, just making sure that there's good knowledge in the community about those efforts. 2B is really then looking at our legislative agenda and making sure that as we're, developing new strategy or new items every year, that we're looking at kind of state and federal needs that might exist and making sure we're advocating for those. And then 2C is to encourage interoperability across technologies and manufacturers. This is really just acknowledging that the industry is still maturing. We're all kind of learning together as more buses are coming into fleets. And so there are certain ways that, we can be a stronger voice when we pair the agencies together. If we encounter any issues with standards as they currently exist or want tweaks, the voice will be stronger as a regional body. Next slide, please. So the third strategy is to coordinate among regional partners on funding and procurement opportunities, which I think everyone's aware of. Just this whole transition process is more costly than retaining the status quo, but I think we also agree that it's an important thing to move forward on. And so action 3A is really just making sure that from the perspective of how to get this plan funded, NVT staff are identifying all of the possible resources, whether it's new grants or even free technical resources that we can use to make sure that this advances. The second action, to develop proposals for multi-agency grant applications. What we're finding is, all of the grants for low or no emission buses are oversubscribed. This is something that a lot of people are out there trying to get funding for. And so we'll have stronger, grants if we do join together. That in itself shows that the region is really committed to growing our clean transit fleets. And then finally, the last action is looking to identify cost savings through joint procurement. And one thing I want to note is that I was really encouraged by a finding through our technical advisory committees that a lot of our agencies were quite satisfied with the Virginia statewide bus contract for purchasing zero emission buses and the related charging infrastructure, which is, it's great when systems work as we hope they do. So really, when we look at this joint procurement opportunities, some of the things are more, it's less the kind of, I think, big infrastructure that we think about, and maybe looking at some of the things like charge or energy management systems that help the entire battery electric bus charging ecosystem just work a little better. And so again, it's that would be kind of some of the joint procurement opportunities that we might look into. Next slide, please. So strategy 4 is support the development of shared charging infrastructure in Northern Virginia. And so currently, the majority of our agencies in the region that are moving forward with zero emission buses are doing it with battery electric buses. And this is really both a challenge and opportunity that emerges of how do you charge these vehicles en route. In a lot of cases, there isn't either enough space or routes are a little too long for all charging to happen at a depot. And so when you start thinking about locations where buses might charge en route, obviously it would be the best use of infrastructure and kind of resources if we're able to share those charging locations among, more than one transit agency. So as many as we can get. And so this part is kind of maybe the heaviest lift of our set of recommendations, but also one that I think could reap some of the bigger rewards. Because right now, when we looked at other areas of the country that are maybe a little further along in this process, there really isn't a notable example of a location where different agencies are sharing charging infrastructure. And so what we'd want to do is really first just do a more in-depth feasibility study of what are all the things you'd have to answer to figure out the operational impacts of at a layover location with multiple bus transit agencies, how you could, successfully share charging infrastructure. And then assuming that such a feasibility study indicated that, yes, it's feasible, then our second step would be this action 4B, which is looking to then actually demo it or pilot it to kind of get a proof of concept that hopefully would work.
Pentagon.
That's the one everyone brings up. Yes, the Pentagon is definitely one of those areas where you have the most overlap with a lot of different bus operators. Next slide, please. So the 5th strategy is to evaluate opportunities for private sector partnerships. And this is coming from the perspective of, with all of the pace of technological innovation in the space, we really want to be able to keep up to date with that and also manage risk. So the first action is really just to host listening sessions or industry days to make sure that we're kept apprised and kind of helping keep the region apprised of all of the different advances in technology that's available. And we just to examine that process and make sure that we understand either if there are cost savings or just new technologies that make operations more efficient, how those can be used. And I will note too that we have some good examples just across the river in Maryland. Montgomery County is doing some interesting work with public-private partnerships and an energy as a service model where they're not taking on the capital costs of building out infrastructure, but rather paying for the power they use. And so 5B is to also then develop a process where we identify regional issues. So, in that case, it might be something like shared charging infrastructure. It could be something else. And then ask, kind of basically put a call out to the public to propose solutions that we could demo in Northern Virginia. And then lastly, kind of the most developed of then these kind of stepping stones into private sector partnerships. If we wanted to, it's to explore options for a request for information, again, to start getting interest in whether there's an RFP potential out there for working with private entities to help build some of this infrastructure and maybe not take, again, all of the risk on the public side. So then next slide, we move to our final strategy, which is to support zero emission bus related workforce training programs. And I think as everyone at this table knows, nothing can happen without the maintenance and operations staff. And these new technologies really require a number of new skills and training. And then, that's compounded too by the issues of just, it's hard to get, full capacity of your workforce as is with our current technologies. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're identifying and sharing zero emission bus training resources throughout the region. We're very lucky to be in Silver Spring. There's an FTA funded transit workforce center that's working on a lot of zero emission bus training. And so we can continue to track what they're doing, but then also make sure that we're engaging with partners and educational institutions, and also DRPT that's doing a lot of work on this at the statewide level. On zero emission training opportunities, apprenticeships that might be happening in other areas, whether it's within our region or, within Maryland. There's a lot happening. And so just making sure that we're kind of connecting all of those dots. And so I believe that is the end. So if you go to the next slide, you have questions. So I ran through that pretty quickly. So happy to answer any questions.
No, first of all, just thank you so much, Anne, and your team for your work on this. I think clearly, and we were happy to launch our buses in Fairfax, that the collaboration, the coordination in our region is what really stands. It's a very long name, so I won't try to read it all at this time. But the zero emission bus strategic planning seems to have a lot of benefit from working as a whole region and understanding, and that Silver Spring connection is also very helpful. So I know we're a little bit late into the evening, so I'll turn it over to Ms. Bagley.
I just wanted to add a quick comment and, thank Anne for her work on it. And one of the things that I think might have just gotten lost in your effort to move quickly tonight is it's definitely a zero emissions bus. It's not necessarily electric. And we had a really good conversation at the committee meeting about compressed natural gas, renewable, green gas. There was a whole bunch of different versions, Arlington's methodology. And so I just wanted to confirm and, that if that wasn't drawn out necessarily in the studies, there was a lot of talk of joint charging and such, but it really, the plan is open. And I think that the study really considered all the potential fuel sources, all the renewable fuel sources that the region could collaborate on. And it was a really good conversation that touched on all the different methods that were studied.
Excellent. And my only question was, I know many of us, our systems have school buses that have also come in. So I don't know if that came into the conversation or if that's being looked at.
Yeah, so it's tricky because school buses have actually quite different kind of operational constraints compared to transit buses. So in some ways they're very different. It's a very different situation. So when we're looking at really regional opportunities, there are these points where whether it's a Fairfax Connector bus or an ART bus, they're meeting at the same place. And so we can look at things for shared charging, or, the transit buses are the same such that you can do share, joint grant opportunities. Whereas school buses are more contained within their individual jurisdictions. And then also they have kind of completely different federal funding streams. So just from a kind of scope perspective of what's within our purview, we really have been focused on transit buses. That said, within, I think, individual jurisdictions, there are examples of at least knowledge sharing among transit agencies and their local school fleets, but less so kind of in the regional work that I'm doing.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. Really appreciate it. I think we have a couple more comments, but do you want to let us know that in our January 2024 meeting is when you'll be coming back for action to adopt the plan. So definitely a lot of opportunity for discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll just try and frame it. Your point was, and the convening role, it won't come as a total surprise to Anne, perhaps, that I have this question. My current impression is that Fairfax, Alexandria, I'm not aware of Loudon, I'm not aware of any other locality, including Metro, except Montgomery County, that is doing other than monitoring hydrogen fuel cell buses. And if there's other places in Virginia that have actually, or Northern Virginia that have actually made expenditures on hydrogen fuel cell, that'd be helpful for me to know, because where I am today is not where I was 6 months ago. And that does not mean that hydrogen couldn't be, you'd have to build, from my perspective, you'd have to build zero emission creation of the hydrogen fuel cell for it to be good enough for water. But it could change in 6 months. I just think Arlington may be on the cusp of being the only jurisdiction to move in that direction. And but are there other places in Virginia that have done this?
I'm not familiar. I'm less familiar with like the areas outside of Northern Virginia.
But Montgomery County.
Montgomery County is certainly in our area, kind of the leading exponent on it. You know, they're building. They've received, I guess, a fiscal year 22 low and no emission grant for hydrogen. So I believe that's 13 buses that they'll have, and they are building a facility with their private partner that is a microgrid that will produce electricity to do electrolysis that will produce the hydrogen. So it will be renewable hydrogen.
Yeah.
There's also, just yesterday, I was in a phone call with a representative from the group Connected DMV, which is both tracking and kind of trying to support the growth of more hydrogen in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and also was the applicant for the Department of Energy's hydrogen hub application, which we should be hearing about that sometime, I think in a few weeks, potentially fall is what I've heard. So there's definitely, I think we'll see advances in the supply of hydrogen, probably, it'll seem, I think, more developed within a couple of years than it is now. But in kind of conversations that we're having within Northern Virginia, there's definitely interest in potentially, piloting a few to see how they operate. They're, some of the, I think, reasons too, you hear some of the strategies that we go through, and to have a specific strategy about shared on-route charging, which is very battery electric bus specific. One of the reasons for that is that operationally you kind of need it in a way that you might not with a hydrogen fueled bus. So yeah, I think people are definitely interested to see how it progresses, but the fact of the matter for like right now, the overall share of battery electric buses out of like the entire zero emission bus fleet in the United States, it's the vast majority. And what exists for fuel cell electric buses, really the vast majority is in California. I do think that's changing slowly. There's also another example of a different grant was awarded to a county in West Virginia for hydrogen production for their transit fleet. So there are examples popping up in the East Coast. And so it's something that I think a lot of us are curious to see what happens in the next year or two.
It's a great answer. It's more complicated than this small mind wanted to.
So warnings to that, is it, I'll go real quick. I did have Ken first. Okay. You still have the
Yeah, real quick question, just out of curiosity, one of the things that's hampering some of the electric vehicles car wise is that the electrical plugs aren't the same, they're in different places. Is there any kind of standardization on the buses, or are they going the same route where it's just like Wild West?
Yeah, so there's an organization called SAE, which I think originally stood for the Society of Automotive Engineers, but I think they're just now SAE. But they do standards for plugs. And so there is an SAE standard for both a bus plug and then also the pantographs of the kind of top charging. One thing that's still kind of working through some of the industry standards is inductive charging, where the charger's in the street and the bus kind of drives over it. So yes, there are standards. I think there's still some things that are being worked through in just implementation of these things, depending on two different companies might read a standard and kind of come up with a slightly different solution to how it works. And so that's when, an important lesson learned is making sure like in your contracting, when you're bringing on these things, you're making sure that like before the bus is in operation, like that OEM is verifying that like it works with the charger that they said that it would work with. So I do think, there are little things that are still being worked out. And I think that's partially where that advocacy action point comes from, where we're talking about advocating towards the industry. It's like, as these things are being discovered, and I think Dash has brought up a few things that they've noticed when using two different types of bus manufacturers and two different types of chargers. There were some, I think, growing pains there. But they're all ones that can be worked through. And the thing I like to remind people too is you think about, if you're driving, just a gas powered car and you go to a gas station, they are a little different sometimes. Sometimes you have to like push a button, other times you have to flip up the thing. Like there are these little just kind of quirks. And so we're just not necessarily used to all of those quirks yet. And we're trying to make there be fewer quirks, but it's going in a good direction. And it's not as, I think, divergent as, what we saw in the past and kind of the light duty fleet, where there really were kind of a handful of very different standards.
Well, thank you for the questions. I think clearly you know every single detail. I think there's some on this, and so we really appreciate it. And I know we'll be coming back in January 2024. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Moving on to the marketing campaign and then to VRE. MVTC's Ride With Us marketing campaign finished in mid-September, set several new records. Really excited about it, as not only did it cover most of our region, I know the staff expanded the reach of the campaign, a broad range of outlets, including Spanish language radio and a complete Spanish language website. Monique Blyther, MVTC's marketing and engagement manager, is here to share a few key highlights. And I know it's late, so you're going to go very, very quickly.
Yes, I will keep it brief. Thank you,
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair and Commissioners. Delighted to share insights from MVTC's fourth regional marketing campaign promoting the use of public transit. Next slide, please. So the 8-week Ride With Us campaign kicked off June 1st, supporting the opening of the Potomac Yard Virginia Tech Station and the reopening of the Yellow Line Bridge Tunnel. Phase 1 launched with geo-targeted ads targeting riders along the blue and yellow line corridors, encouraging them to plan their trip via transit using our novarides.org webpage. So we've developed 2 landing experiences for novarides.org, one in English and Spanish, both linking to rideshare services and public transit options in apps like Move It, where riders can map their commute via transit. Next slide. Phase 2 of the campaign launched mid-July with radio streaming, email, and continued social media advertisements. New this year, we dramatically expanded the number of radio stations we advertise with from 3 to 12, which dramatically expanded and diversified our audience with greater visibility in minority and Spanish-speaking communities. Also new this year, we sponsored preseason events with the Washington Commanders on iHeartRadio. Next slide. So diving into key highlights from the campaign, as of August, the campaign delivered over 16 million impressions, which translated to nearly 60,000 clicks to the novarides.org English and Spanish landing pages. I should note that 20,000 of those were new visitors to our landing page, which is a pretty substantial number. And as you can see, organic social media was a primary driver of traffic, with display and email ads rounding out our top 3 performers. Now, as we dive into user engagement, we notice a significant increase in Spanish engagement this year. Spanish ad clicks were up 60% from last year and accounted for nearly half the total clicks from social media, with a higher click-through rate than English ads. And that speaks volumes, considering that only 30% of the budget was allocated to Spanish language advertisements. Our key performance indicators is the conversion of clicks to Move It and the traffic navigation app Waze. More than 6,000 users clicked to plan their trip via transit using Move It, and over 14,000 clicks were generated from Waze, which is pretty awesome. This is where drivers click to navigate to a local transit station. So the big question is, how does that translate to ridership? Next slide. We compared ridership data from participating partners between this year and last year's campaign, which both ran during the June through September timeframe. We were able to collect data through August of this year. And as you can see, there's an increase in ridership across the board. Total monthly ridership for artists up 11%. Dash is reporting a 17% increase, Fairfax Connector, a 15% increase. Virginia Metro, which includes blue, yellow, orange, and silver lines, is up 36%. OmniRide, 8%, and VRE is reporting a 23% increase. And as much as we like to take credit for the growth in ridership, we recognize the increase can be attributed to a number of factors, including improvements along the blue, yellow, and silver lines, increased service, and other marketing initiatives like VRE's Fare Free Friday campaign, which also ran over the summer. Overall, we're excited to see that the performance of the Ride With Us campaign has shown to be successful in not only engaging a larger demographic audience, but also connecting commuters to public transit options in our region. Last slide. So we'd like to thank DRPT and our regional partners, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, PRTC, and VRE for funding and contributing to this year's campaign. A special thanks, Madam Chair, to your team for helping us with our Spanish language translations, and to my colleague, Matt Friedman, and Transit Fellow Nathan Varnell for helping to make this year's campaign a success. So that concludes our presentation. Happy to take any questions.
So first of all, thank you and Matt and everyone and the staff who helped launch the campaign. Clearly very successful. I know I actually saw it and heard it as well for the first time. So very, very good work. Any questions from commissioners? Comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Quick comment, just want to commend staff again for the work on this. I heard it on WAMU, I heard it on WKYS, I heard it on some of the Spanish channels. And especially with the Spanish language media outreach that we're doing, I'm really excited for that way we're being able to expand our audience, and the numbers are showing our investment is paying dividends. So really happy about that.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you and your team. All righty, we are moving on to VRE. Rich Dalton's not with us tonight, but we do have right, Schofield. We are not going to do the CEO's report. I think you can, I believe, go ahead and read it. You may have some highlights.
I was going to get just one or two.
Yeah, good, because I found a couple I wanted to share. So Mark, if you want to share a couple of highlights, and then I will turn it over to VRE Operations Board Chair James Watkins Shaw to present the action item.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. Just a couple of things to highlight from the CEO report. Over the past couple of weeks, we have had a couple of middle of the week days, Tuesday, Wednesdays, where we've broken 8,000 riders again. We're hoping to continue to see more and more of that, continue to drag that average ridership number back up. Our on-time performance over the past month has been better than it had been previously. We've had fewer issues at Washington Union Station, but still not quite back to the 90% level that we're hoping to. So we're continuing to work with Amtrak on those issues. I want to say thanks to all the jurisdiction staff out there and the commission staff who helped us to complete the master agreements survey, which we did yesterday during all the morning trains going into downtown. So we'll be compiling all the data from that, and that, as you know, will go into the budget and help with determining the allocation of the jurisdictional contribution. And then I'll remind everyone that Clifton Day is this coming weekend, Sunday, October the 8th. If you have a chance to get out there, it's a great event. And VRE is a great way to go rather than having to try to drive and park in Clifton. So just go to I guess it's the Clifton Betterment Association. And you can see what exactly the timetable is for VRE to ride in there. So
excellent.
Those are my highlights.
That is what I wanted to point out. I was looking July to August, bikes on trains from 1,000 to 1,700. Sure. And your average daily ridership went up from 5,900 to 6,300, and your monthly ridership from 117,000 to 146,000. So excellent. Moving in the right direction there.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right, we'll turn it over to Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The VRE Operations Board recommends commission approval of Resolution 2505, which will refer the preliminary FY 2025 operating and capital budget to the jurisdictions for their review and comment. VRE's preliminary FY 25 operating budget totals $119.9 million. It includes operations, maintenance, and existing debt service. In addition to continuing our existing weekday service, and this is of a historic moment, I think, for VRE, the proposed budget provides for the first ever operation of VRE weekend service. And Mark will talk a little bit more about that during his presentation. The budget includes a total jurisdictional subsidy of $18.3 million, which is precisely the same as the pre-pandemic subsidy that jurisdictions were paying. There's a proposed 5% fare increase and some changes to simplify the fare structure. The preliminary capital budget includes commitments of $70.2 million from federal, state, regional, and local funding sources toward the CIP. And as you know, VRE's CFO, Mark Schofield, is here to give us some more information about it.
Thank you, Mr. Walkinshaw. Yes, we do have a few slides. I'll try to move through them quickly. As you know, in our agreements with VPRA as part of Transforming Rail in Virginia, the original expansion concepts looked at additional slots for both the weekdays and the weekends. Since that original agreement, the priorities have changed, the timing of some things have changed. You know, these weren't written in stone, and where we're headed right now is to, like Mr. Walkinshaw indicated, begin to demonstrate that we can offer weekend service. All of the changes that we're talking about here for fiscal 25 are still subject to negotiation and approval with the host railroads and with Keolis, our contractor provider. And so what we really have right now is a parallel kind of an effort for me and my team to make sure that we have that included in the budget as we move ahead, and then for Rich and the operations team to continue to negotiate on how we're actually going to go to this work. So next slide, please. The way that we're trying to make the concept work, 3 round trip trains on each line, heading northbound in the morning and then heading back out from DC in the afternoon and evening, coordinating closely with Amtrak, who also has trains in the corridor during the weekends, to try to space all of those out so that people have the most options that they can to get to where they need to get to. If you're looking at train miles, which is a pretty good measure of the level of the service that we're providing, that would be an increase of about 8% over what we offer currently just during the weekday. The real question is, how do we put this out there in a way that is cost effective, given that it is a little bit uncertain how many people, especially at the beginning, will ride it. And the answer really is to sort of make lemonade out of lemons. Our trains are not 100% full right now. We can take some of our longer trains that maybe have 8 cars on them, take them down to 6-car consists. That will allow us to have one fewer conductor on the train. We can then reposition those conductor resources to run the trains on the weekends. Next slide, please. So that's the weekends. The other thing, as Mr. Walkinshaw mentioned, is we have some proposed fare changes. Items number 1, 3, and 4 up here really are to improve things for customers. We've had a lot of success with the lower promotional fare that we have in zones 1 to 3. That's close into downtown. We're looking to make that permanent. Number 3 is to eliminate our weekly pass. This was a product that maybe 2 decades ago was relatively popular, and right now almost nobody uses. So we're just going to be eliminating it. Most people either are using the monthly pass if they ride a lot, or they're using the 10 trip if they only ride occasionally. And then one that I like and that we've gotten a lot of positive reaction to already, we currently allow children 10 and under to ride for free, and then we have a discounted youth program from 11 to 18. We'll be changing that to allow all kids 18 and under to ride for free. We hope that will really encourage families to ride on the new weekend trains. And we have relatively few people using the youth pass right now. We have some kids that ride to the Catholic prep schools downtown, but that relatively marginal amount of revenue that we think we'll lose there. And then number two is really the one that is intended to help the budget. We're looking to increase all of our base fares by 5%. We think that would bump gross revenue by approximately $1 million. And again, as we've talked about, inflation over the period since we last raised our fares is close to 20%. So we're not looking to get all of that back in one fell swoop, but we are trying to get some balance back in the budget. Next slide, please. So in accordance with our public participation policy, we are taking these fare changes out to the public. We've already done the notification. We are already beginning to receive public comments. We have in-person meetings scheduled for downtown at L'Enfant, for Manassas, and for Fredericksburg. The two at the end of the lines are in the evening. The one at L'Enfant is in the middle of the day. Then we're also going to have an online one, which we'll record, and then people can come and watch that at their leisure. And then hopefully we'll get a lot of comments and a lot of feedback. We'll also be encouraging feedback, not just on the changes here, the changes to the fares, but also on the budget in general, the weekend service, all the things that we're talking about doing. And then once we've compiled all that, we will bring that back to the operations board and the commissions so that you all can hear what the public thinks. Next slide, please. I won't go into a ton of detail here. We're going to be working with the operations board over the next couple of months, diving into the details of the budget a little bit more. I would say, we're putting in some rough estimates of what the weekend service is going to cost. As we said, you still have to negotiate some details of that. We've seen inflation come down on the big things like the Keolis contract and the host railroads. So that should bring increases down a little bit lower than they have been in previous years. We're working with our, consultants to project the cost out for things like diesel and insurance. I think the big thing is that last bullet, the preliminary budget is really the ask where nothing has yet been deferred or eliminated. Rich and I will be meeting with the department heads across VRE in the coming weeks to really try to pare down at least those areas where we can get rid of discretionary things and try to bring the budget down as much as possible, given the constraints that we have. Next slide, please. This is just a pie chart of sort of everything, including the capital budget there, the big orange slice on the left. But it's really, I would point you to those two little yellow and gold slices down there at the bottom, the other departmental costs and the staff costs, which together are about 12% of our total budget. Those are really the two areas where we have some ability to squeeze and to defer and to eliminate. All those other pie pieces, be it the debt, the insurance, the fuel, you really don't want to be cutting back on things like that if you're going to operate the service. So those two little pie pieces are where we'll be concentrating. Next slide, please. Just to highlight, to be candid, some of the challenges that we've had with trying to project ridership in the environment that we've had, where we've been sort of consistently hoping that we'll see a pop of, federal employees coming back to the office, and it keeps just growing slowly rather than popping. So, you look at the dot that's kind of at the top there, the 10,000 riders a day, that was what we had projected for this year. To be honest, I don't think we'll be getting to that. And if you look at the trend from, 2021 to early 22, that was more reasonable back then, given the growth. But where we're headed right now for 25 is really more like 8,000 to 9,000. We'll see how the rest of October, November goes. We may tweak that number by the time we come back in December, but that's about where we think we're going to land now. Next slide, please. Mr. Walkinshaw already mentioned proposing again to return to the 18.3 million number that we had prior to the pandemic for the jurisdictional contribution. Just to note, kind of like we had talked about there with the passenger fares, that the subsidy, had it grown with inflation since 21, would be a little over $22 million. Next slide, please. We've talked about this before because of action down in Richmond. This is the last year that we're part of the merit program along with the rest of the transit agencies in the Commonwealth. Next year in 25, we will be receiving dedicated up to 3.5% of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund, out of which we will have to decide how much of that will go into the operating budget versus how much of that we'll use for capital grant matching. Right now, it's looking like that will total about $16 million. And right now it's looking to split about even between operations and capital, but we expect that may change over the coming months. We also are in conversation with DRPT right now. As you'll note, the wording up there is up to 3.5. There are performance measures related to ridership and cost effectiveness and safety and security that we will be reporting on each year. And then DRPT will be making recommendations to the Commonwealth Transportation Board about whether we should receive the whole 3.5%. So we are working cooperatively with them on that right now. Next and last slide, I believe. Thank you. Obviously, the big question here is, we're being supported by the pandemic relief money that we received. The blue $85 million there is the initial tranche, the CARES Act. We have drawn all of that down between March of 2020 and late last year. We've started to draw on the rescue plan money. So that's the light blue from last year, and the dark blue is the year that we're in right now, fiscal 24. That's our projection for how much we'll use. And then that sort of light yellow and gold yellow is how much of more we have left to use. And again, all this and with us. And we have this last, not just because it's important to wrap up with it, but because really this is how we use the pandemic is a residual of all these other policy decisions that we're making. How much expense we have, how much we decide to charge passengers, all of those things. It's really a dollar for dollar against how much of the pandemic relief money we have to use. And so all of those decisions that we make either bring that cliff a little closer or stretch that cliff a little further out. And so we'll have a little more detailed discussion. This is at a very high level. We'll have a little more detailed discussion about this during the rest of the budget process. And with that, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schofield. Just one question on I think the previous slide. You said 24 is the final year of the merit program, and then 25 receiving the 3.5% of the mass transit fund. How do those compare currently?
In this year for operating assistance, we are receiving about 6 million and change, between 6 and 7 million in operating assistance. And then we were successful in seeking merit capital funding for our Manassas Park parking garage project. And we also have some match money for the rail car bond payments that we have. So I'm sorry, I don't have exactly an apples to apples comparison, but we're receiving quite a bit less in operating money this year, but then there were some periods during the pandemic when we received quite a bit more. So it has changed a lot over time.
Okay, and I know you'll be probably looking at or have that in detail as you continue conversations, but those who are not as involved with VRE, that very helpful comparison. Thank you very much. Yes, any additional questions or comments?
Just I just want the last slide. The slide with the 18 million and the last slide with the future years. We're in a different spot on Metro. We want to be responsible and not create a structural problem. I think maybe I'll just follow up with you, James, or offline to get a little of that. I want to be responsible, but we're walking into a huge, you guys may be a little less, but we're definitely walking into a big deficit for Arlington. And so I wonder if there's a little more gradual to that responsibility, but it's 9:30, 9:43, and why don't I call you? That's okay.
Call me tomorrow.
Very much appreciate seeing that it is now 9:45. Thank you so much for the presentation. I believe we are ready for the motion. I will turn it over to Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move approval of resolution 2505.
Second.
Excellent. Any questions or comments? All right, we'll go ahead and begin with Mr. Brule.
Aye.
Mr. Brule?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right. Aye.
Excellent. Thank you. All those here in person, can I have the ayes?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Thank you, both of you for VRE for that presentation. And we all will now move on to DRPT.
I will be very brief. You have my written report in your package, and I will just point out that the Commonwealth Transportation Board will be meeting in Arlington week after next. And that will include, as Mr. Smedberg mentioned earlier, a briefing from Randy Clark and Virginia's WMATA board members. So that concludes my report this evening.
Thank you. And I know that date probably we're asking is, I believe, October 17th to 18th.
17th and 18th is when CTB is going to be.
Excellent. So I will turn it over to Kate Mattias for her very brief report.
I will make it as brief as I can, but I do want to introduce new staff. Vikram, hopefully you're good. You made it through. He's still here. He's still here. He's our Commission 7 program manager. And so we're really excited for him to join us. He comes to us from Austin Transit Partnership, where he was served as the public involvement manager for the Orange Line Light Rail project. But prior to that, he was in New York City DOT doing lots of really cool things, including a number of things related to BRT. So I'm sure I can go in a whole bio on him, but we're really excited to have him here. He's like 4 days in. And he's here at almost 10 o'clock. So thank you. Thank you so much, Vikram. And I would be remiss because I would like to thank Xavier Harmony for being the outgoing project manager. He's still here doing great stuff in the data space, which makes him even happier. But thank you, Xavier, for all your great work. I mean, he came right in the middle of our Falls Church study and really brought it to a successful conclusion. And it's a fantastic handout he's able to do with Vikram. So, and a couple other things I just want to announce. This coming January, NVTC's actually got 2 presentations that have been accepted for the Transportation Research Board annual conference. This is a really big deal. This is the largest transportation conference in the world, and it's held every January here in DC, and it gets about 13,000 people. And so you've seen some of the work. Xavier and Sophie their paper regarding advancing bus priority. As well as the study on bus stops that was done with Rachel, our transit fellow, have both been accepted for presentation. And Xavier's also going to be serving as a moderator at that event. So we're really excited and very proud of our team for being able to do that. As you heard earlier, I'm going to be at the American Public Transportation Association along with Alan. He is going to be doing a presentation on the Value Transit Study while he's out there. And I'm going to be moderating a session on fare technologies for people who are unbanked and how to do that. And of course, we'll be cheering on Mr. Smedberg as he receives this award. Finally, reminder, we do have October 19th, right after that, the CTB meeting. A couple days later, we have our joint meeting on legislative policy and WMATA committee. More and more fun folks are starting to show up and sign up for our legislative forum. We have over 100 RSVPs for the event that's in Arlington this year. Katie Crystal's agreed to moderate our transit panel. And we do shortly, we'll be announcing some other guest speakers that are joining us. And then finally, the next commission meeting is November 2nd. We'll do everything we can to not have it finished at 9:55. But I really appreciate everybody staying through. We had a lot to cover, and I very much appreciate the attention this evening. And of course, financials are available in the materials.
I think that was amazing. Thank you so much, Kate. Not seeing any questions or comments. We are adjourned at 9:50.